Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villere's Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villere's provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villere's Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we talk about all the home teams. We'll talk about the Saints. We'll talk about the New Orleans Pelicans. We'll talk about the LSU Tigers. We'll touch on the Tulane Green Wave as well. And a great guest to break it down for you, Jeff Duncan, columnist for the New Orleans Times-Picayune and NOLA.com, is our guest tonight. Jeff, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here. And we always start off asking people about what's going on with you, but I guess we'll kind of go into a back and forth now because we all know that, again, the Times-Picayune has been sold to John Georges and the Advocate. And I guess the first thing that everybody wants to know is, what's Jeff Duncan going to do?
Well, I don't know yet. It's it's still pretty fresh with everyone at the paper and at NOLA.com, and I'm just going to try and take advantage of this time to figure things out. I'm 54 years old. I'm getting up there, and it's at a stage of my career. I've been almost 20 years at the Times-Picayune, right. The longest by far of my journalism career. So I need to let the dust settle a little bit and see where that leads me down the road.
You know, Jeff, a lot of us, we talked about it on this show last week. We've talked about it on radio. I mean, everyone that's in the city has been talking about this. You know, there's so many layers to this. You know, individuals that again, we look at the bylines. We get a feel if you're a reader of the individuals that are reporting the news. And again, we're talking about Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. We're talking about some of the top journalists in the nation that are here. But the loss of jobs here, with this the buying of the Picayune, not just the journalists, but those that work with you guys behind the scenes as well, those in advertising. I mean, again, this is a big deal here in the city of New Orleans, not just about, again, the paper itself, but again, the human capital as well.
Well put, very well put, and I think that gets lost sometimes when you read about these things. And look, it's not just the Times-Picayune. We see these things, and you see these headlines all over the country. And we all turn the page or click on another page on our laptops, and you don't think about behind the scenes. Those numbers you read sometimes, 81 people laid off or 81 people lost jobs, those are human beings, and we've got a lot of great ones at NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, people I've worked with for 2 decades, won Pulitzers with, like you said, and beyond that, it's a team. It's no different than the New Orleans Saints when they win a title or win a championship. There's a lot of roles being played, and a lot of them are not high profile, but they're just as valuable to the overall success of the organization. We've got a ton of those people, and this was a historic moment in the history of the city. The old Times-Picayune building on Howard Avenue, we used to have the different names of the organization on the wall, and you'd see it, back in the 50s, the States Item and Times-Picayune merged, and before that, there's been a lot of different iterations of these large media outlets like the Times-Picayune, and that's what happened last week. This was another milestone in that regard, and the Advocate buy-in. The good news is the Times-Picayune's still going to be alive.
And make that point, because that is a point, right?
Yeah, I think there's a misperception out there, especially nationally. And the outreach I got, I should say, was extraordinary. It reminded me a lot. It was analogous to Katrina. People in the impact it had across the country. I heard from people that I haven't heard from in years. So that was humbling and also somewhat encouraging the support I received. But make no mistake, that was a big day in the history of our city.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You mentioned Katrina. I put it out on social media. You know, again, we can never forget with the individuals who work at the Times-Picayune, the reporters, the people behind the scenes, the photographers, how they stood tall for this city during Katrina and after Katrina, you know, delivering the news through, again, the toughest of times. And again, that's something that a debt that will never be repaid by the people of this city.
Yeah, there's a bond there from the people that did that. And I will say this, a lot of those great journalists are at the Advocate.
Yes.
Working there, putting out great content. They just won a Pulitzer Prize this year, well-deserved Pulitzer. And a lot of those are my former colleagues, and they do great work there. So the New Orleans market's still going to be served well by quality journalists. And I think that, in the end, is what's important. The Times-Picayune's not going away. It's not dead. NOLA.com's not dead. It just has new ownership.
Yes.
It's going to be run by different people, but it's not dead. And I think that's ultimately what's important.
And I think we need to remind everybody, again, everybody, as I mentioned, sees the bylines. They may have know their favorite journalists, looking forward to the columns or what they're writing. But again, a lot of these are native New Orleanians that are behind the scenes here or that are working there. So when you talk about loss of jobs, you're talking about your neighbor, your friend, your family member. You know, this is not, you know, what the decisions that are made in New Jersey were made in New Jersey at the end of the day about the paper. But at the end of the day, it was individuals here in this city that work that paper every single day.
Right. The people that run the Times-Picayune, it's run locally. And some of the best people I've ever met and worked for in my life. And I respected every one of them, and that means a lot in this business. It doesn't always happen that way. From Ashton Phelps and Jim Amos on to Mark Lorando today, were very good people who love the city and work tirelessly to be the watchdog for the city and all the things that go into journalism. And you're right. I mean, a lot of them are not going to be continuing on, and it's heartbreaking. It's a gutting situation. I can tell you it's still hard to kind of comprehend.
For everyone. For anyone, again, that has obviously relationships with individuals that work there, or those of us that grew up with the Times-Picayune being thrown on our doorstep as well. I mean, it is a changing of the guard, so to speak. We wish you nothing but luck and success, no matter which direction you go in the future.
Well, thanks. Look, I want to stay in New Orleans. I mean, you and I agree for sure. I mean, New Orleans is one of the great cities in the world, and I've lived here 20 years now. I can't imagine living anywhere else, and there's a lot of people at the Times-Picayune feel the same way. Either you're born and raised here, or the people that came here because they love this market and love the city, and I love it to death. And so hopefully I can end up staying here and continuing on.
Well, I think that they would be foolish not to have Jeff Duncan as the columnist for whatever it's going to be, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, or ultimately if it's maybe renamed the Times-Picayune. And let me say this, Jeff. I saved this for, again, certain people in our city. You may not be New Orleans born, but you're definitely New Orleans certified.
Thank you. I feel that way.
Yeah.
I feel that way. This is the greatest place I've ever lived, and I've lived in a lot of great cities, a lot of places I love, but nowhere like this with the passion, with the culture. I mean, the unique way of life that we have here, and I think you either get it or you don't, and I certainly got it right away.
Well, and one thing I love about you and Jeff and I are friends is you've immersed yourself in it since the day you got here.
Yeah, I mean, I remember distinctly, Eric, when I worked in Monroe, Louisiana at the News Star, coming down to cover events at the Superdome, and just you felt differently when you crossed the city line. I could feel this kind of, there's an aura about the city. It's like a living, breathing thing.
Yes.
It's not true of most cities in the world. But this one has it, and a lot of people get that.
Yes.
But it's really hard to quantify. And if you ask people about that, there's something about New Orleans. You know, you don't hear that about a lot of other cities. And we've got this incredible market sports-wise, incredible passion for sports. We punch way above our weight for our weight class as a market. And you know, I can't imagine working anywhere else.
Yeah, you know, some people that we live here, we grew up here, you know, we've been here all our lives, and I think sometimes we take that for granted.
Yeah.
People that come from outside that again assimilate themselves in our culture, they get it, and sometimes we need to be reminded of it.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, but I do think the one thing that drives this city are the people and the passion they have for all things New Orleans.
Yes.
You know, jazz, we just got off Jazz Fest, right? I mean, we have Mardi Gras. We have so many different things. Our institutions of you know, some of the great restaurants that we continually support over decades, sometimes centuries. And the Times-Picayune was one of those brands, and still is one of those brands. And the Saints are one of those things. You know, the part of the cultural fabric of the city. And I didn't know that when I moved here. I will say that when I moved to New Orleans in '99, I didn't know the Saints had that connection. Maybe because they hadn't been successful. Right. You certainly know about the Pittsburgh Steelers, passionate fan base, the Green Bay Packers, the Kansas City Chiefs. There's nowhere like New Orleans with the Saints. It's unique, and I think that's just the people of the city.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Jeff, let's talk about a story that you broke about a week or so ago, a little bit over a week ago. Superdome renovations. It's been talked about. We had heard little whispers about it, but you were able to go out and to be able to find out exactly what the wish list is for the Superdome Commission. Talk a little bit about it.
Well, it's a big story. It's one we've been tracking for a while now. But the big news last week was they met with Governor Edwards and got the green light from him to go with the project, and that was the big hurdle for them. It wasn't a hurdle; that's not the right word, because he's been endorsing it all along.
He's been good for New Orleans. I don't think people, you can talk about Republican, Democrat, wherever you are there. Governor Edwards has been a friend to New Orleans.
100% agree with that, and I think what's encouraging, if you're a Saints fan or just a sports fan out there in New Orleans, is everybody's working on this together. It's very much a collaborative mission between the team, the stadium representatives, and the state representatives. Everybody's lockstep together. Both sides are making concessions. Both sides are giving a little. Both sides are understanding, some of the challenges that the other side has, and they're working together. That wasn't the case 15 years ago. So this is a positive step for us in our city, and this is a transformative renovation. It's not an aesthetic. It's not going to excite people. There's not going to be a lot of things that the general fan looks at the renovation and there's not a lot of bells and whistles.
Sure.
What it is it's upgrading the guts of the stadium. The bones are fine. Now we got to work on the guts and the things that make that building run on a daily basis, that under the hood, if you will, that when executives come in here from other big conventions, from other large sporting events, and they're looking at the competition, and they're looking at Dallas and Houston and Atlanta, this building has to compare. And frankly, it doesn't in a lot of ways, with the food service, with the transportation, the vertical transportation, just a lot of these things that, again, aren't sexy to the fan, but they're important for us to keep that building competitive long term.
You mentioned, how it was years ago, and look, I'm not going to sit here and knock the late Tom Benson, but a lot of times these were contentious negotiations. There were guns to the head of the governor, of the people of the city of New Orleans, the state of Louisiana. Renovate, give me what I need, or I'm gone. This is a total different vibe now. With again the Superdome Commission coming together. $207 million as you reported from the Superdome Commission. $150 million by the Saints. The state putting up about $93 million. This, for the first time in a long time, we're seeing this. Now, I will give credit. Again, you look at the school boards and some of the renovations that were done the last time. That was the Saints, and Tom Benson did that. But this is a whole different vibe in terms of these negotiations now. As you mentioned, everybody seems to be on the same page moving forward.
Yeah, and I think the success of the team has helped. It's easier for Governor Edwards to sell this in Baton Rouge when the team's winning and the Super Bowls are coming here. Right. So I think that helps, certainly. And I think the Saints' success has also helped them, their bottom line. They're a much different organization now in the Drew Brees, Sean Payton era than they were when Aaron Brooks and Todd Baumann were quarterbacking the team. And
Billy Joe Hobart.
It's easier for them when they're flush with season ticket sales. And I think Dennis Lauscher told me they're 98% renewal rate. That's unheard of in the NFL. So they're doing well, and the state is not doing well at this time. So it's important for the Saints to step up and give money this time around. They need the Saints. This is the largest amount they've ever given. And frankly, I think they could give a little more. Dennis Lauscher argued with me about that, but I think, they could step up a little more. But the fact is they are stepping up and contributing. And this is going to help them. There's going to be some areas it's going to help their bottom line, revenue stream wise. It's going to help the fan experience. And what's important to the Saints, and I think it's wise of them to recognize this, they need to upgrade the food service in there and upgrade some of the, they got downgraded and their rating was really poor from the fan experience. They're great with the fan experience, but that's one area that they need to improve, and that's a thing that will manifest itself for the fan going to the game. They're going to get better food there. It's going to be hotter. It's going to be more options. There's going to be easy. It's going to be easier to get to. And when they eliminate those ramps, and I had a lot of people on the comment stream say, "Oh, that was part of my childhood, going up those ramps."
Yeah,
and after a big win, you could hear it echoing. And
yes.
I get that, but I think when they see what's going to look like, they'll be fine getting rid of those ramps.
Let's talk about it. Expanded 300-level luxury boxes, which you reported, new in-zone field level boxes, expanded plaza loge and terrace level concourse, which you just mentioned, new end zone corner standing room only viewing decks, expanded team store retail outlets, and Saints Hall of Fame, and a new visiting locker room. This is all in the conception at this point, right? These are things they would like to do.
Well, no, I think most of those will get done.
Okay.
Now, there's a list of other things that are unfunded priorities, like the ramp on Poydras. Everybody's seen those ramps, those pedestrian ramps on Poydras. They would eventually like to take that out, but that's a phase 5 unfunded priority. These other things are going to be part of the $450 million package. Yes. The most interesting things, I think, are the standing room only decks up in the terrace. So they're going to have to eliminate some terrace seats up there. They have the largest amount of terrace seats of any stadium in the country. I think that reflects the fan base of the New Orleans Saints. I mean, this is not, I've heard some executives say, this isn't a Neiman Marcus fan base, this is a Walmart fan base. And it's just the way it is.
True.
It's New Orleans. There's a lot of blue-collar fans there who can afford the terrace level seats. So they have to have 30-something thousand terrace seats. Now you're going to lose some of those to have these standing room only decks, but it's going to create a little different viewing experience for the fans up there. They can go walk around, meet friends at a spot for beer. And that's the way people view games now. They don't sit in their seat the whole game for the most part. But that'll kind of wash itself out. The lost seats in the terrace, those new club level, end zone level box seats, there'll be more of those. So that'll kind of, the seating capacity is going to be the same. And one thing that'll be interesting, I think, for fans, you've probably seen games in Dallas where the Cowboys come out of their locker room and they walk through the fans onto the field. They're going to build something like that, these passageways from the Saints locker room and the new visiting locker room where both teams will be coming out field level with fans all around them. That'll be a little bit more of a high profile.
For years, again, you mentioned the food service. Again, it's hard to believe in a city like New Orleans, the food service is not, top notch, but it's not. The other part of it is getting back and forth to the seats, and the expanding of the concourses is going to be huge for the Dome. Yeah,
that's probably the number one thing they're renovating is trying to improve the vertical transportation. They have a lot more escalators, elevators. Those things are way behind, and frankly, I've been beating the door on that for the press elevator.
Come to the press elevator, right?
And I know no one wants to hear that, but it's substandard in the NFL, and that does matter because we have visiting press from all over the world in that Superdome, and it's not up to code. It's not up to standards of the NFL, and it gets out, and that reflects poorly on New Orleans. So it's important to fix that, and they recognize that, and they're going to get into that. There's some other things that are still priorities that aren't funded that I think would be possible down the road. Well, we all know where Champion Square is, and there's a large parking garage there. There's thought maybe one day eliminating that parking garage and having a campus there with tailgating area, green space, opening that whole area up. These parking garages bring in a lot of revenue for the Benson family, for the Saints, for the Superdome. But eventually, the way people arrive at games is changing. Not as many people use those parking garages. They come in Ubers. They come in like large vans. So it's changing. Our game habits are changing, and these changes also reflect that.
Right. Be done over four phases. Is that's going to happen over the next 4 years?
Yeah.
Is that the plan?
If they get the one thing left to clear this is the bond commission has to approve the funding. It's a really creative financing package. If they get that approval in July, then the construction will start as soon as this next football season ends, and that would either be with the BCS, the CFP National Championship game, or if the Saints somehow host the NFC Championship game again.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, if they do that, it would be sometime in January, and the construction would start. It would end again in football season, and then would start again each year.
Jeff, as part of this, Saints will extend their lease 10 years, which is huge as well.
Yeah, well, that's the lead, right? I mean, that's the trade-off.
We buried it.
That's the trade-off. Yeah, I did bury it. I've done that before many times.
Well, I just buried it too.
Governor Edwards, that's the sell that he can make to the legislature. Now, none of this really requires legislative approval.
Because the money's already there for the Superdome Commission.
Right.
The money from the state, $93 million, we'll have to see what that is. But again, the Saints putting on that money. But again, hotel motel tax, that's why it's so critical still, that hotel motel tax continues to go toward the upgrade of those buildings.
Yes, and that's why Mayor Cantrell and what we just saw passed did not try to get into that money.
That's
because
right.
this money is earmarked for this renovation, for the Superdome, and was never going to be part of those negotiations.
And it needs to be continually filling that pot as well.
Yes, and the one concern I think as taxpayers, as all of us should have, and I asked everyone in that room when we met, is God forbid we have another crisis.
Yes.
Whether it's a hurricane, whether it's 9/11, if we all remember what happened, air travel in America stopped, the hotel motel tax took a dip, and it couldn't support everything that goes on in the Superdome, because that's what supports the Superdome, is hotel motel tax.
Absolutely.
If no one's traveling, that thing's going to struggle. If we have something like that, that could be a concern. But I think they've got plans to have some kind of what do they call it, force majeure insurance that would protect the state from that liability in case something like that happens.
We're going to get into the Pelicans in a little while, but it is so refreshing to see how Gail Benson has handled herself as the owner of the Saints and Pelicans. Not contentious negotiations. Seems like she's bringing in the best people. She seems to, she seems to be on top of things. It's a different, I mentioned this earlier, it's a different vibe when you talk about the way things are being run right now with Gail Benson.
Well, I think she recognizes that, she's different from Tom Benson in a lot of ways, but one of the things in particular that stuck out to me is she recognizes this is a we thing. We're all in this, and the fans, the media, their customers, it's a we. And the state has to be part of that we. We're not adversaries. It can be a win-win in negotiations. It doesn't have to be I win, you lose.
Yes.
That was a Tom Benson. That's just the way he operated.
That's the way he was built.
Yeah, that's the way he was built, and that's where he got where he's at. But in this day and age, when you're going to the state and it's asking for state money and you're playing in a state facility, it really does have to be more collaborative, and that's the way it's operating right now. And that's a credit also to Dennis Lauscha. He and Doug Thornton, who runs the Superdome, are hand in hand on this project. And I think it all trickles down from Gail Benson and her management style. And that's good for New Orleans because she is now trying to change the culture with the Pelicans.
Yes.
They did that when they hired Sean Payton, got Drew Brees. New Orleans is now a destination organization for NFL players.
Yes.
They want to play here with this quarterback and this head coach. They've got to turn that around with the Pelicans. That's their biggest challenge, getting players to want to come here and play. Frankly, right now, I mean, this is a long slog for them. It's going to take them a while.
Yes.
But that's what they've got to do. But it's already started with her being able to get David Griffin.
No doubt. We're going to get into that in a few minutes. As a native New Orleanian, I could not imagine the skyline of New Orleans without the Superdome. We heard from Dennis Lauscha talking about it's an iconic building. The buy-in of the Saints realizing again that first of all, there's not enough money in the state right now to be able to build another dome. Where would you do it? Where would you play while the dome would be being rebuilt? And again, trying to be able to squeeze the most you can out of this building. And look, the buy-in on the Saints, the buy-in on the fans and the people here in the city. Again, making sure that we keep up with the quote-unquote Joneses going forward.
Yeah, and there's really no motivation, I think, from anyone to build a new stadium.
Sure.
They know it's impossible. It's just financially, economically not possible. So trying to make it feasible for the state side, that's what the Saints could throw up their arms and say, look, this is a 50-year-old building and we need a new stadium or else we're going to leave in 2025. They're not doing that. They want to stay here. They're trying to make it work and understand the challenges the state has right now financially. So I have to give them credit. And I think a lot of that comes from Gail Benson and her understanding. Her and Governor Edwards have a great relationship, and that's very important.
That's good to hear. And then the comments she made a few weeks ago about the Pelicans, and when everyone was asking the question about the Pelicans being sold and moving, and she talked about being the guardian of these franchises and understand that again the franchises belong to the people of New Orleans, and she's kind of the steward for those franchises.
Look, I bring this up all the time, and that was like music to my ears when she said that, because I've written that a bunch of times, and I think it's important to remind everyone when they award franchises, when Commissioner Rozelle awarded an NFL team, he awarded it to the city of New Orleans.
Yes.
And then they went out and got an owner.
They found John Meekum, right.
And that's how it works. They award it to a city, and you are just a franchisee. That's all you are. And I think somehow that's been lost over the years, and some of these owners think it's all about them. And yes, they do pay the bills, but you have to work on this together. If you're going to do a lot of public-private partnerships for these stadiums, you're asking taxpayers to contribute. You have to act like this is a community-owned franchise.
Right, and look, it's not the Green Bay Packers. That'll never happen again in the NFL. But if you get an owner that has a buy-in with the community, like it seems Gail Benson has, it's just as good.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. I just wish that some of the teams and some of the organizations, some of the commissioners would recognize that a little more, because they play into that when it serves them. Sure. And then when it doesn't serve them, they're going to relocate and move the team.
Right.
So I think they need to recognize that. I know that the NFL does not like relocation, but I don't ever see this team leaving in New Orleans. The way things are going right now, the passion, the support, it would be a travesty, and Gail Benson's never indicated anything like that.
The only question I think anybody would have would be a succession plan for Gail Benson if and when she passes. And from what I understand,
she's got one.
She's got one.
She's got one. None of us know what it is.
Right.
I tried to ask her what the details were, but the league's already heard it and approved it. So there is something out there. I don't know. Maybe you and I might be a part of it.
We can only hope.
Yeah. Who knows? But
hey, we're talking good.
I won't turn it down, Gail.
Right.
I won't turn it down.
No doubt. Our guest tonight is Jeff Duncan, columnist for the New Orleans Times-Picayune and NOLA.com. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to jump on Pelicans first because he talked about David Griffin and the changing of the guard there. We'll get into that. Then we'll get into some Saints, talk some college baseball as well. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Stick around.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guest tonight, Jeff Duncan, columnist for the New Orleans Times-Picayune and NOLA.com. We've concentrated on the Superdome renovation and of course, Gail Benson's short tenure as owner of the Pelicans and Saints. Home run. I'm shocked. I've had it on this show and the radio show. I would have loved to have had David Griffin as the head of basketball operations for the Pelicans. I just didn't think it was possible. I didn't think they'd reach the price that he was asking. I thought they would probably go with somebody maybe a bit younger. We've seen teams in the past go maybe on a little bit on the cheap, or again, with George Shinn going after guys that he thought were up and coming. We can be a little critical of the Benson ownership group with staying with Dell Demps as long as they did, but David Griffin is, to me, the absolute best hire that they could have had. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I mean, I like Danny Ferry as well. I think someone experienced. Mm-hmm. This isn't a job for a newcomer in that position. They've got too many big decisions to make, and the job is, frankly, just too big. I mean, this is a total makeover, a culture change like we talked about earlier. And I think in that regard, you couldn't have found a better candidate than David Griffin. He's not shying away from this challenge. He's actually embracing it. He wanted this job. He's had other jobs, offers around the league at bigger markets. So I think that's a credit to Gail Benson and the organization that he was attracted to this job in spite of all the challenges. And you're right. I think they stepped up to get him and have given him a lot of rope and a lot of resources to turn this thing around. It's important to them. And I think they bristle a little bit when they hear the criticisms that the Pelicans or the WLAE team,
the stepchild of the Belson organization.
And but I do think that resonated with them. And I think they wanted to go out and get a home run like David Griffin. And so far, so good. I've been impressed with him. He's focused on trying to change the culture, but also the front office, try and get, as he says, what he said at his introductory press conference, I thought was very smart. He said he's not worried about titles and roles. He just wants to get the best smartest people on the bus. And then while we're on the way to the destination, we'll figure out what the titles are. That's so wise, and that's exactly how you build a winning organization. Just get good, talented people in there and figure out what the roles are later.
Yeah, and look, he did an interview with Corey Johnson today on his program. One of the things he talked about was Trent Redden, a guy that he's very, very close to, who he wanted to come in as a general manager. But as he mentioned to Corey today, look, Trent wasn't all the way in. And as much as he wanted Trent here and would have liked to have had him as his number 2, because he wasn't all the way in, again, they shied away from that hire. He has complete autonomy. He has the full resources that he needs, unlimited resources, to be able to turn this into a championship team. And for the first time since basketball has come to New Orleans, there is a vision now for a championship.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how he executes it, because he's in a little bit of a different position here than he was in Cleveland.
Sure.
Or even when he was in Phoenix. He's got obviously a big decision to make with Anthony Davis coming up. But long term, that's short term. Long term vision. What's his philosophy? Is he going to take the small market approach of San Antonio and Oklahoma City? I think these things have yet to kind of reveal themselves. What's he going to? Who's he going to get in the front office to work with him? I know he just hired Aaron Nelson, I think it is, to oversee their marketing. He's basically going to be like the czar of the training, conditioning, and medical.
Right.
And I think that's important to have that there. They've had some issues with that in the past. I think it's encouraging that he recognized that right away. It's important to him. And I think Griffin, what he brings to the table, I think, is the experience and wisdom that a Mickey Loomis has on the football side. He's almost like a poker player.
Right.
And he's got a lot of big poker chips he's going to have to push on the table here soon.
Well, Jeff, it's changing the narrative, okay? It's changing the perception of the team to other NBA players. It's changing the perception of the team to other individuals that cover the NBA or people that are involved in the NBA, that this was a basketball organization run by football people. It's changing the narrative to anybody out there that thinks that New Orleans was, again, just in it to have a team and they weren't looking to win a championship. Aaron Nelson is a perfect example. Again, you look at the problems they've had with the medical staff, with, again, misdiagnosis. This has been an often injured team. You bring in a guy who is, again, looked at as world-renowned, a guy that extended the careers of Nash and Shaq and Grant Hill. Remember, Grant Hill was often injured. Okay, Phoenix became a destination for NBA players, especially veteran players, because of what Aaron Nelson did and the techniques that he brought to the table. And again, that is a culture change for this team as well. So, right out the box, he brings in someone that changes the narrative, one of the negative narratives on this team.
Yeah, he made that hire immediately. I think David Griffin has a checklist. I think he's been sitting out for a couple of years trying to figure out if this next job he gets, who he can bring with him. And he's got an all-star list, and he's checking them off. He tried to get Rendon. That was one of his top guys. Aaron Nelson was one of them. There's going to be more coming up.
Right.
And I think his ability to get as many of those names on that list in this organization is going to be critical to success going forward, because that's a big part. That's going to be that'll have a trickle-down effect on the decisions that are made with the roster and everything else going forward.
And again, harking back to Corey Johnson's show this afternoon, David Griffin was on his show. One of the questions that Corey asked him was about the willingness of this franchise under the ownership of Gail Benson to go over the luxury tax threshold to win a championship. And he responded by saying, yes, when we are in a position to win a championship, he has been assured by ownership they will go over the luxury tax threshold, and again, that the resources will be there. And I think that is huge for anybody that really follows the NBA, when you see, again, now the super teams really being dominant among the top teams in the NBA. You've had someone here in Anthony Davis. We'll get into him in a moment. But again, if you are close, that you are willing to be able to do what it takes to take the next step to be able to get into the arms race to win and win a championship.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, winning a title.
Yes.
You're not going to be able to win a title in this modern era, I think, by not going in.
It's true.
You're going to have to go in the luxury tax. That's obviously down the road.
Down the road.
You get
Absolutely.
to that point, first thing's changing the culture to where you get successful enough to attract the superstars that would cause you to go over the luxury tax. So that's down the road, but it is good to know and encouraging that they're willing to do that, because they haven't done it yet as long as the Pelicans have been here.
He trusts Alvin Gentry. He has a relationship with Alvin Gentry. There were a lot of people in this city, fans, casual fans, that really want to see Alvin Gentry go. A lot of us that, again, watch this very, very closely have seen that, again, maybe he didn't get the type of help that he needed from Dell Demps. They never seem to be on the same page. It seems to be that David Griffin and Alvin Gentry are on the same page, and you got to at least give an opportunity for a general manager to hire his guys.
Right.
And he retained Alvin Gentry.
Well, yeah, the best thing that happened for Alvin Gentry is David Griffin
No doubt.
getting the job. I don't know if Alvin Gentry would be here
I don't think so.
if he wasn't. But they have a good working relationship. They know each other, and I think David Griffin understands this is going to be a big challenge, a big rebuilding job, and he wants a veteran guy like Alvin Gentry that's seen it all, and a guy that can work together. And then, look, they're going to evaluate Alvin Gentry after next year. His contract's up after next year, so that helped him as well. He had one more year on his deal,
right.
And if they're getting ready to go out and buy out, Dell Demps, pay David Griffin big money, bring in all these new front office people. There's only so much money to go around. I don't think they want to be buying out not only Alvin Gentry, but his entire coaching staff.
One of the things that was mentioned on Corey's interview with David Griffin today is, again, he has contacted Rich Paul. Anthony Davis, Rich Paul, and David Griffin will sit down at some point. The question is twofold. First of all, do you think Anthony Davis will be back? And if he does decide to buy in 100%, as David Griffin has said, he's all in or he's all out, what do you think the reaction of the fan base will be?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. If he came back, I think they would eventually buy back in as long as they win. But there's some damage control certainly to be done there. That's the concern I think everybody in the organization should have. How much has the water been poisoned by Rich Paul and Anthony Davis? But I don't think you're going to worry about that because I don't think he's coming back.
Right.
I'll be stunned if he comes back. I think what David Griffin is doing is very smart. I think it's strictly a leverage ploy. I think he's getting behind closed doors with those guys and saying, look, guys, you're not helping me help you. You want to move on. How can I do that when you're poisoning the waters and making it very clear that you want to be traded? I can't trade somebody. It doesn't help me get leverage in a trade.
Right.
And so I'm not going to trade you just for nothing. And so you're going to get stuck here. So if you want to move on, act like you want to be here. Let's act like you're happy, so we can at least present a little bit of a facade that we don't have to trade you. And I think that's all that's going on right here, and I think it's very smart.
So it's your belief that, again, Anthony Davis will not be in a Pelican uniform next year. That
No.
This is all leverage. This is all, again, just to be able to, again, get the best deal possible for the Pelicans.
Increase the market value for him.
Sure.
Right now the market, and I think that helped extraordinarily that Boston got eliminated early. I think that's only going to help the Pelicans get a better offer from Boston, but they got to be wary of who they're getting.
There's no doubt.
Because there's a lot of red flags on that roster.
Well, there is, and I mentioned that today on today's radio show. David Griffin has to really, again, have a really good feel for what's going on in that locker room because that locker room imploded. I mean, it was last year, a lot of young players got a lot of playing time, and they kind of came into their own in the NBA. All of a sudden, you've got Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward coming back. There's not enough playing time for a very, very talented team. And they became a very, very selfish team, very me team. Is that going to be something that's going to translate over to the next team? And again, you got to make sure you're getting guys, if you're making a trade, a blockbuster trade, you get multiple assets, that those guys like each other and they can play together.
Yeah, it's
you don't want to bring a cancer to New Orleans that's already festering in Boston.
What's going on in Boston is a case study in chemistry and roster building.
Agreed.
And they built a fantasy basketball team, and that doesn't win games. If everybody in New Orleans wants to see what would be a case study on how to win, look at Milwaukee.
Yes.
I mean, that's a small market that has no tradition, no history, a recent history,
Sure.
I should say. They certainly have a history
Absolutely.
of winning, but they built that thing the right way. They've got a superstar to build around who makes teammates better.
Yes.
He makes his teammates better. Chris Middleton is no superstar. He's a great
There's not another
he's playing
superstar on
great.
that. There's not another superstar on that roster.
He's raising the level, which is
Right.
what great players do. He's raising the level, building confidence in them. And I get so tired, Eric, of hearing the LeBron excuse. He doesn't have anybody around him.
Right.
Make players better.
Right.
That's what great players do. I see Drew Brees do it every year with the New Orleans Saints. He bolsters the confidence of his teammates. He makes these young receivers that no one's ever heard of believe in themselves.
Yes.
That's what we see with Giannis up in Milwaukee, and it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, look, I talked about it multiple times this week. The Greek Freak is Batman, and he doesn't need a Robin.
Right.
Okay? He has uplifted that entire team. He leads by example. He leads vocally. And, of course, as you mentioned, the things he can do. He is everything that we hoped Anthony Davis would be, but hasn't been. And ultimately, again, proving it in a small market. And that's another thing I like about David Griffin. He doesn't want to hear small market.
No, and that's what I mean. It's going to be interesting to see how he chooses what the philosophy is going to be.
Yes.
Because he's done it a couple different ways in a couple different places. But I really think the draft and develop is going to be the way of the future here. I mean, you're going to have to, I mean, just by the business model of the NBA. It almost in a sized town like New Orleans, this isn't NFL where revenue sharing and Green Bay can win titles.
Right.
I mean, you really have to be smart, like Oklahoma City's done and San Antonio's done. I think that's probably going to be the pathway to success.
Something Dell Demps was not patient enough to do.
No, not at all. I mean, he had a totally different philosophy. He's outside the box. In his defense, I think he was trying to win now because Tom Benson was advancing in age.
Agree.
And he was trying to put together winning teams, but it felt like they were just making up on the fly each year to win that year, and there was no long-term vision.
Right, no doubt about it. Speaking of the draft, let's shift to the Saints. Your thoughts on the Saints draft?
Well, I think they did the best they could with the limited resources they had. They weren't going to get a blockbuster draft with with the lack of a first-round pick, third and fourth rounders. So they got a guy that they think can start long-term in Eric McCoy at a position of need.
Do you think he's plug and play?
Well, I don't know.
And that's a tough position to be plug and play.
I don't know. I think that's a lot to put on the young kid early. I think they put themselves in a good position there. They got a veteran guy that has started, and now you've got a really intriguing young prospect, and you let them battle it out.
Sure.
And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Drew Brees adapts to these new centers. Max Unger was the signal caller on the offensive line.
Yes.
It's going to be hard to replace that experience and know-how that he had there. So I think that's asking a lot of Eric McCoy, but I think now they've got some flexibility there, not just this year, but going forward. Andres Pete is not under contract beyond this season.
Right.
Larry Warford's going to have a huge deal. So now they've given themselves flexibility much the same way when they drafted Alvin Kamara, and they already had Mark Ingram.
Right.
And you're like, why do we need Alvin Kamara? Well, now you know why. You can let Mark Ingram leave in free agency if he doesn't have the right number for you, and you've got a player ready to go. I think McCoy will help them in that regard on their offensive line.
Chauncey Gardner-Johnson could be. He looks like he could come in and be a guy that could really contribute immediately.
Well, I know this. He won't be intimidated by the stage.
Right.
Anybody, the scouts I know that know Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, this kid's cocky now. He's not good. He's not shy. Saints fans are either going to love him or hate him because he's going to be talking trash.
Ball hawk.
And he is in your face. And they might need a little of that in that secondary. That secondary's got a lot of talent, but they don't really have an alpha dog there. And this kid's got a little dog in him. But he gives them flexibility, again, and versatility. He can play a number of positions. We know how Dennis Allen likes to play multiple safeties, so it made a lot of sense as well.
Saquon Hampton, again, a guy out of Rutgers, is another safety, but a guy supposed to be a special teams phenom. Alize Mack, again, the Notre Dame tight end. Caden Ellis out of Idaho, the linebacker. All guys, again, special teams players. Mack is a guy that, again, was underutilized, maybe not utilized the right way at Notre Dame. It seems like they have a vision for each and every one of these players.
Yeah, and look, they've got positions that they needed some depth to. They needed to address depth at. So tight end, linebacker, those make sense. Those kids are going to have to make the team, special teams for the most part. But this is a deep roster. It's one of the deepest rosters in the league. So I think they've got an uphill climb to try and make it. But they can always make the practice squad. These are the kind of developmental guys you take late in the draft. They have like a redeeming quality. There's something that
something they do
have,
very well.
Yeah, that stands out that can help your team. And you get them with your position coaches. You get Mack with Dan Campbell, one of the best tight end coaches in the league, and you see what you can get in him. And I think he's going to be basically, he and Dan Arnold are going to be competing to see if they can get on the field for playing time. So that's what it's all about, developing competition.
I like what Sean Payton has done in terms of embedding his assistant coaches with these prospective draftees. You can look down the line. There is a relationship with a coach with almost every one of these players.
Yeah, and that some organizations don't lean on their coaching staff as much in their personnel acquisition. The Saints do. I think it's really smart. They're the guys going to be coaching these cats, and they do that very well. And there's I think they've got a harmonious situation there between the scouting department and the coaching department. And that's also not true in a lot of organizations, and I think that's a big part of their success.
How critical is it to keep Jeff Ireland with the New Orleans Saints?
Well, I think they're going to keep Jeff Ireland. I think he's going to end up being the general manager of this organization one day, very soon. I don't know how much longer Mickey Loomis is going to be there. He's very happy, I know. He's obviously concentrating on the Saints now, and that was important in this organization. I can tell you that was something that Sean Payton was not happy about, was Mickey Loomis spending any time with the Pelicans. And now that he's back solely concentrating on on the NFL, I think that's going to help keep Sean Payton here long term. But Jeff Ireland is an integral part of that organization, and I know has the utmost confidence of Sean Payton. And it was important for them not only to get him a new contract, but to get him a state of the art, a contract that's merits what he should be paid.
Right, and really the title that goes with it as well. I would hope down the line.
Yeah, he was a big get for them a few years ago, and I think we've seen the byproduct.
You've seen the transformation of this team based on his drafts, no doubt about it. Jeff, but before we shift gears, needs on paper, when you look at it, there's certain positions where you think the Saints need to either beef up or add a starter. Now, starter's hard, but beef up or maybe back up.
Well, I think they've got a huge need at pass rush. I think once you get beyond Cam Jordan, I think there's a lot of question marks.
Right.
We know that the Batman last year was Sheldon Rankin.
Yes.
Well, we don't even know what his status is going to be. Marcus Davenport showed flashes, but he also was injured. I think he's still unproven. We know they were interested in Ziggy Ansah. Looks like he's going to Seattle. But it showed you that they felt there was a need there. I just remember last year down the stretch, that pass rush evaporated. It was non-existent almost in the 2 playoff games. I think they had 1 sack in 2 games.
Right.
If Cam Jordan goes down, I think they're in big trouble. So I think they've got to continue to look for that. But that's a hard thing to find. Everybody wants pass
Nobody's
rush.
giving away pass rushers.
Yeah, so that's a spot that I think could continue to haunt this team.
Also, I think tackle is also a need there, especially when you've seen the injuries that they've had with Armstead. Even though you can kick Pete out or you can move Ramczyk, they've got a lot of guys that can swing on the inside, not a lot of guys that can swing outside.
Well, I think that's where Pete is. I think that's what he becomes valuable because he did it last year.
Yes.
He can play either tackle, but let's face it, I mean, he's not nearly as good at left tackle as he is at left guard. There's a reason they got him at guard. And that, I think, would be a significant drop-off as well. And look, injuries are going to happen. This team was very fortunate last year. I mean, up until the last few weeks of the year, they avoided the injury bug, and those things tend to kind of even out.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Let's shift gears to LSU. Scott Woodward is the new athletic director. Your reaction?
Well, I thought that was a great hire. I thought they moved quickly. Clearly, that thing had been in the works for some time. I think it will galvanize the LSU fan base. It's something Joe Alleva clearly had not done. And sometimes I feel like that was a little unfair to Joe Alleva. Not all the time. I think he had his transgressions and mistakes he made in hiring. But now they've got an LSU man in there, accomplished college administrator, guy that's proven he can make home run hires.
Oh, yes.
And LSU is a massive job, and it's a political job. And Scott Woodward, I think, will navigate the minefield there much better than Joe Alleva did.
I call him the ultimate insider because of his ability to be able to, again, deal on the political side, which we know LSU is very, very political. Learning under Mark Emmert, and of course, being a native Louisianan, growing up in Baton Rouge in the shadow of Tiger Stadium, being an LSU alum, he checks all the boxes from what you're looking for an athletic director at LSU.
Yeah, and it's a unique position.
Right, it is, at LSU.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think Skip Bertman would tell you. I mean, that's a tough job, but it's a big job. It's one of the biggest athletic departments in the country, and I think he knows the inner workings of that place. He's born and raised there. He knows a lot of people there. So to me, they couldn't have got a better guy just because of the role he was at. He was already in the SEC.
Right.
To me, it was a no-brainer, and I thought it was smart for them to move quickly. And get that thing taken care of.
That leads us to Will Wade. The trial is over in New York. Dawkins and Code were found guilty. Again, not all the charges were there. I'm not going to the litany of charges there. But it seemed as though the judge and those that were involved in this trial didn't feel like that the NCAA, that the universities were being injured by, again, these quote-unquote bribery schemes. Again, another thing leaked out about Will Wade. With a possible $300,000 payment to Naz Reid. That's another black cloud on top of, again, the international kid that went to FSU, and of course the strong ass offer that was allegedly given to Javonte Smart. You had Book Richardson as the one that spoke about the $300,000 offer to Naz Reid. The question is, first of all, what do you think Scott Woodward's going to do with Will Wade? And then the other part of this is, What do you think happens next? Do you think that the federal government continues to go down this road after the Southern District of New York, they had ruled? Do you think that the NCAA now, based on what they're doing with Sean Miller in Arizona, will take a hard look at LSU?
Well, I think the latter. Let me answer that. I think they're definitely going to look at LSU, and I think that's why Scott Woodward has been very cryptic in most of his answers when asked about this, because I think the NCAA now, the ball's in their court. What are they going to do? They've already tipped their hand, they're going to investigate Arizona. Now, there was a lot more hard evidence that came out about Arizona than came out about LSU.
$10,000 a month payment to Anthem.
Right. So I think there's a little bit of a difference there. But
Plus, Book Richardson was on that staff, and he's talking about his own head coach.
He's directly implicated.
Right.
But I do think the NCAA is going to be under a lot of pressure. A lot of programs, a lot of administrators, a lot of people are looking to see what they're going to do. Are they going to allow all this to just happen and not act? And I think, unfortunately for LSU, they are one of the teams under the microscope, one of the more high-profile teams, Arizona being probably the most high-profile, but Arizona and LSU and Will Wade have been mentioned too often, and I think there's too much pressure on the NCAA to not do anything.
Right.
And I think they're going to take a look at this. Now, whether they can find anything is up to their investigators, but I don't think this thing's over with.
I think one of the big questions is going to be, will the FBI and the federal government turn over all the evidence to the NCAA? Now they can receive that evidence since they've changed those rules. Is that going to happen? Or again, will they keep that sealed and ultimately the NCAA will have to do their own investigation?
Well, yeah, it's going to be one of those two things. Right. And the NCAA now has the opportunity to use that in their investigations if it's available.
Exactly.
But they're going to go in, I guarantee, and use what they learned and do their own investigation. They've got some very good investigators there. They don't have enough of them, but the ones they have are very good and they're very skilled at these things.
And the other part of that, something again you know from your alma mater, the University of Louisville, they fired Patino, they fired the athletic director. One of the things they're hoping is, again, because they were proactive, that they won't see postseason bans for their basketball team, that the NCAA will look fairly on them because they did take the initiative of cleaning up the basketball program. That kind of puts it in Scott Woodward's court now, basically.
Yeah, it does. And well, I mean, I think it's going to be, he can't do, I think, anything right now
until there's an actual investigation.
Yeah, until there's an investigation.
Right. You just kind of let it play out.
Yeah, you got to let it play out. And so I think in some cases, I think my alma mater, University of Louisville, acted too quickly by doing what they did. They actually.
Well, it was multiple scandals. It was again the stripper gate, and then of course the payment of players as well.
Right, but I mean, you could make an argument that maybe not the athletic director. It could have been.
Sure.
But the point is, there's some argument you can make for him to wait and see what happens, see what comes out of this. But again, I think there's a reason Scott Woodward has been very cryptic. I think he understands that there's a long way to go here, and I'm sure he's getting intel from NCAA. As well in this matter.
No doubt. And look, LSU has themselves covered. They changed the contract here,
right?
In terms of
smart.
What is it? Level 1 or level 2 violations. They can cut him for cause. They can fire Will Wade for cause.
And here's the other thing: there's a lot of uncertainty with the roster. We don't know what's going to happen with that. Right. I mean, how it's being affected. I mean, Will Wade's got a lot of unanswered questions right now. The future of LSU basketball, there's just a dark cloud right now, and I think it's going to hurt their ability to recruit.
Right. Well, again, as you mentioned, only Naz Reid and Tremont Waters were offered an opportunity to go to the combine. So that means Javonte Smart, Mays, Taylor, and also Williams all have the opportunity to come back to LSU if they want to. The question is, will they come back to LSU? That'll be a precursor and a telltale sign of maybe what's going on with the program. And then, of course, as you mentioned, leading into this, LSU looked like they were going to have a pretty good recruiting class. The bottoms kind of fell out on that right now.
Yeah, and they lost the lead assistant, Tony Benford, left.
True.
So there's just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things in limbo. They have a chance, if they get some of these kids back, to be very competitive.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it, but they're losing their two best players in Reed and Waters.
And both guys, I think, could use another year in school. Now, we know that the NBA, again, they draft on prospective. But
potential.
Yeah.
It's all about potential.
It's all about potential. But both those guys could use more time in school. What's going on with the LSU baseball team? Again, first of all, your thoughts on the season coming in number one. Everybody thought they were shooing for Omaha. I can tell you, probably a lot of LSU fans out there went and got their tickets set up for Omaha, and right now they're treading water.
Yeah, it's been really a disappointing year. I think Paul Maneri would tell you he's probably as disappointed as anybody. I think looking back on it, I mean, we probably should have seen this red flag early when they got swept by Texas, who's not really very good this year, not very competitive in the Big 12. That this was not a national championship level team. They've really struggled with their pitching at times. Just inopportune. Even their defense has been, I think, shaky.
Inconsistent hitting.
Yeah, they haven't just put it together. And sometimes that happens with a baseball team. It can, some teams can gel, some teams can just never gel. It feels like some of the injuries they had, they lost their way. Some players couldn't identify roles. And it's been disappointing. And on the other side of that, there's been a lot of surprising teams in the SEC, teams we didn't know were going to be good that suddenly did the opposite. They actually gelled together very well. And it's always a bear of a competition in the SEC West. But I would say that you never want to count them out. I think the goal for them now is to try and get some home games in the postseason. They've got a lot of work to do to get there.
They do. Again, they've got Arkansas, UNO, and Auburn left. They're going to probably have to sweep those last 7 games in order to be a regional host. We'll see how that goes. Final question for you as we get ready to wind this up. Talk about Travis Jewett, and do you think he's done enough this year to merit continuing at Tulane?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the jury's still out on that. I think this team has to finish well. I think he made progress, certainly. I mean, there was more interest.
Agreed.
They've had more success. They're more competitive across the board. We see some recruiting gems that have come to fruition and blossomed. So I think there has been reason for optimism there, but Tulane needs to be back in the NCAA tournament. They need to be a factor again in the conference race, and that, I think, is the standard we're used to at Tulane. And I think ultimately Troy Dannon's going to have a tough call there because there's a lot of Tulane fans that want to see that team back.
Well, again, that's been the sport perennial that again you could count on being a top level in terms of the competition, and also with the NCAA. Tim Duncan, not the one from San Antonio, is now the athletic director at UNO. Your thoughts?
Well, I liked what I heard from him the other day. That's a special job as well.
Yes.
It's a very difficult job. You have to understand it, and that's what I think quickly I got from his speech was he understands that what the challenges UNO has. The resources are limited there, but I think his enthusiasm was very encouraging. I mean, he sounds like he really loves the city and loves the opportunity and challenge ahead. But that job, look, just keep Mark Schlesinger on board. That's big for them out there.
No.
And look, UNO's had a great tradition in baseball as well. They've been very competitive. But he's replaced. Derek Morrell did a good job out there. He got that thing going again. I have a lot of respect for Derek, and so Tim's got some big shoes to fill. But I like just what I heard from him as far as his enthusiasm for embracing a challenge that a lot of people would be shied off of.
You mentioned Coach Schles, Coach of the Year here in Louisiana. Blake Dean obviously doing a great job there. I got a friend, Mike Bazan, who's with me on Fridays on my radio show, calls UNO the cradle of coaches. Which again, it's not that far off when you think about some of the great coaches that have come out of the University of New Orleans.
Yeah, look, I think Coach Schles could coach anywhere in the country. He's one of those guys that does a lot with a little and doesn't complain about it. And he's going to have a competitive team every year. He knows how to cobble together that thing. He just needs to work better on some of his tie choices. I always get on him, man. He's got a ways to go on his fashion statements.
There you go. Well, maybe just go tie-less. How's that? Jeff Duncan, the New TimesPicUNOLA.com. Thanks for being with us tonight, and best of luck for you and your future endeavor, and hopefully it's right here in New Orleans.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate that a lot. It means a lot to me.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLE at 10 p.m. Also statewide on Pelican Sports Network. That's 9 o'clock every Friday. You can catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2 on the iHeartRadio app. That is weekdays noon to 2 right here in New Orleans. And, of course, you can always listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. Remember, all the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans can also be seen at ericasher.com. Special thanks to our guest tonight, Jeff Duncan. Also to the WLE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Alex Chacon, Naila Jones, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for another broadcast of Inside New Orleans. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Thanks for Jeff Duncan being here. We'll see you next week.